As I get older, every kind of life stage, I'll have a seasonal reflection on what would it be like to be now ripped out of my life and put in these prisons. Right now, I have these two kids, 6 and 8, and all I think about is what I do with what I tell my kids, what I do with my kids.
This is Eric Carr, a volunteer interviewer with the Kizuna Project. It is March 28th, 2026, and I am in Tucson with Dr. Esaki. Do I have permission to record you?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start off with some basic information. When and where were you born?
I was born in Redwood City, California in 1979.
And how did your parents or grandparents' experience in the camp shape your career?
Well, it's significant. So all my grandparents were in the internment camps. So both my parents, both their parents were, and as well as their aunts and uncles, so their whole extended family there. So definitely affected. And then a kind of a fun fact of it, my father's parents actually met in the camps and were married in the camp. So if it weren't, oddly, if it weren't for this experience, I wouldn't be here.
How do you think this affected your career in going into what you've gone into?
So I'm in roughly the field of ethnic studies and religious studies, but really I kind of more think of myself as a scholar of spirituality and art. And so this has profoundly affected how I think of things, my unique perspective in the academic world, the value and importance of experiences and personal experiences, the expression of experiences, the documentation of those experiences. Those are all part of my career, and wouldn't exchange them for anything, but they're definitely part of that longer history. Thinking back, my family has had profound art experience within the camps, especially on my mother's side. My mother's father, so my grandfather actually never met, actually ended up running a theater afterwards, after the camps. So that's all part of the longer legacy of the art part of my family, and I definitely bring that to what I study.
The theater, did that come out of any experiences in the camp?
Well, it was. It's a funny. I wish I could have seen these plays go, but they're a mixture of like kind of traditional Japanese theater, kind of kabuki stuff, but then clearly mixed in with some kind of U.S. themes. One of the best images that my family still has of this is actually of the whole troupe dressed as women, and they're all men and they're dressed as women about to do a play. I think, as I remember, they were all doing an all-female cast, except they're all men. So anyway, really interesting stuff. I wish I were alive to have to have seen all that and to know kind of what all went into it.
Wow. Do you know anything about their experience of the arts while incarcerated?
Well, so arts in the camps is always a complicated thing. One of the challenges is being an art expert before the camps made you a target for policing. And that's because in that era they believed that Japanese culture meant Japanese allegiance. And so again, on my mother's side, being artists, they were automatically affiliated with that. And I believe my great-grandfather was put in one of those high-security prisons because of his art organizations.
And what were the arts that he practiced?
Poetry and theater.
And that was considered dangerous enough because it was an allegiance to the Japanese culture and therefore government.
Well, yeah, it's a little complicated, but essentially, if you were an artist, that meant you were a Japanese cultural expert, which meant you knew a lot of Japanese. In that era, they believed that if you had a language that's your first language and instilled in you, that actually shaped everything you thought and believed and behaved. And so the assumption was if you're a Japanese language culture expert, that must also mean that you are thoroughly enmeshed in all the Japanese nationalist ideologies. And so that's it. They didn't really do much thinking. They just did a lot of arresting.
Right, yeah. Right. You had mentioned before that your grandparents actually met in, was this your grandparents or great-grandparents?
This is my grandparents.
Your grandparents actually met in the camp. Mm-hmm. And do you know anything about the circumstances of that and what life was like for them and what it must have been like to be incarcerated and still find the resilience and life to meet each other and love each other and make a family?
Yeah, obviously very complicated. I got the honor of interviewing both my grandparents for their 80th birthdays, and did a little like mini life history and stuff like that. So I actually learned a pretty good amount about their courting, I guess is what they would call it back in the day. Essentially, they went on a date, not thinking this would be marriage or anything, but just because it did. I don't exactly know how they showed movies in the camps, but they went to see a movie together. And apparently a matchmaker was just kind of around, and she saw them together and just went, that's a match. So the kids, as in my grandparents in their 20s, did not know this was happening. They just went on a date because, you go on a date in your 20s, right? And then sure enough, their families started to get together and organize this arranged marriage. In fact, he didn't even know, like my grandfather didn't even know this was happening, like actually actively happening. And then they kind of sprung it on him, like, oh, you're getting married. It's like, what, to who, what's happening? So it was a big shock. But both the families had been arranging this together, and I think from the family, I didn't get to talk to them, but from what I hear is it was a big excitement for a lot of people in the camp. The families themselves were excited to do something fun and different. Families, not only their families, but other people, including the chefs, would actually save sugar and flour from the rations so they could make a wedding cake. The photographer was actually one of the prison guards who was an amateur photographer and just carried around a nice camera. The cameras were not a contraband in the camps, but he had a camera and he was an amateur photographer, so took a wedding photo. Anyway, it was from my grandparents' perspective, they didn't know a lot of this stuff was happening, but you can kind of see it from the community's perspective that it's something positive to do, something fun. So it's not the kind of typical romance you might have assumed it from the way we do it outside of a prison, but for them it was a big thing, and obviously the family got a lot of joy out of it. And the matchmaker was right; they stayed together till they both passed. So,
you allude to the fact in your book that you were close with your grandparents, and that they included you in a way that they did not include other generations or other family members. Can you talk about that some?
Yeah. So for my parents' generation, so these were folks who were not born in the camp. They were born after the camps were over. And for them, they didn't have that kind of personal experience of those. Of that era. And their generation was very much dedicated to figuring out what happened, because they know something happened, but their parents wouldn't tell them about it. If they did ask, they would either tell them, no, I don't want to talk about it, or just, let's talk about the happy parts, not about the other things you want to do. And so for my parents' generation, my parents specifically, they became very frustrated with their parents as well as their extended aunts and uncles, because they also wouldn't reveal anything. They would ask them, and they would often say, maybe later, different, no, let's not talk about that, let's talk about this. And they got in a lot of arguments over the years, and just got nothing, But what's interesting is that when I came around, as a young adult, I think I was in my teens when this started to really happen, I could start asking about things. They actually were much, much more willing to share with me than they would with my parents. And there were several times where I would just go and talk to them, and my parents would, on the drive home, go like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Because it never happened to them, and we've asked them over and over, directly, and they wouldn't say it, but then, So the book project, one of the things that got inspired me from that experience was just the kind of rhetoric that my parents' generation had was that the experience of these camps were so detrimental psychologically that they didn't want to talk about them because it's just too painful. And they used pretty horrible analogies, but of people who've experienced violence and trauma and not being able to talk about them. But I actually came to think of it something a little different, which is that my grandparents didn't feel that if they told their children about what happened, that they were going to react in a kind of calm, rational, non-emotional way. they thought that what they would do is really harm their children by telling them about the kinds of harm they went through. And you can kind of understand that from a protective parent. You know, like, I went through a lot. Why would I just go lay that on my kids? They look happy enough, you know, that kind of thing. And then in their teens, I don't know, they just couldn't get out of that pattern. What they explained to me is that they felt that I was not going to be upset by this type of information. Like, I was interested, but not in the kind of like, why haven't you told me about this before? But, you know, I just wanted to know about things. And what I realized is that for many in that generation, they were really very concerned about how they were going to psychologically affect their kids. But looking at the grandkids, specifically me, they didn't think that I was going to be hurt by that information. I just wanted to know. I wasn't trying to go and start a political movement or anything. I just wanted to know about their lives. And that kind of just spurred it open, and they would just all start talking. So yeah, that's the kind of experience I got to have, that if you have an audience that you feel is secure with that information, that they can tell you that. And anyway, I thought that was a fascinating part of my growing up, and definitely affected how I thought about that whole lived history.
Did that affect your relationship with your parents, with you being able to have this knowledge that they were not told?
I mean, I guess. I think my parents were just happy to hear it. In fact, they weren't often not even in the room, but they were like, I can try to reimagine it, that my parents would be like, oh my God, they would like be on the edge of the room listening in to me talking to them and them telling the stories to me. But then themselves not being in and asking things. And I'm sure they wanted to just jump in and start asking things, but like, oh my God, it's happening, that kind of thing. So I think they did look at me a little differently, and my generation a little differently because of that. I don't know if I think they're still mad at their parents because of all that. They put a lot of effort to try to get information and just not getting any. Did they resent me? I don't think it was like that. I think it was more, again, still directed at their parents. Like, why? Like, this was not that hard to just tell these stories, you know. But for them, it was. For that generation, it was very difficult to try to do that to their direct children.
Did you see that play out in your parents, the knowing that something had happened and this kind of ghost of generational trauma? Mm-hmm. Did you see a reaction or response to that in your parents, even though they didn't know the details?
Yeah, so just a quick legacy thing that I think about, unfortunately too often. I didn't grow up speaking Japanese, and that's directly because of the internment camps. My father's side, my father was raised when he was a little tiny kid by all these like neighborhood grandmas, you know, and they only spoke Japanese, and so he grew up only speaking Japanese. And then one day he came to talk to his parents and was only speaking Japanese, and they blew a gasket. And they were really worried that their kids would be stuck to the same things they went through, and so forbade him to speak any Japanese for the rest of his growing up. So that's one thing. Like, I didn't get to know that because of that. My mother's side was a little different, but still, I didn't grow up with the fluency. I did learn Japanese in school, but Japanese in education is business Japanese, which is mostly Tokyo Japanese. And honestly, I didn't recognize what I was learning because it didn't sound anything like what my grandparents sounded like. Anyway, so that's kind of a quick thing. And that they were scarred and they knew things were bad, but they didn't quite know what was, exactly what, but they knew something was something did happen. And so that definitely got passed to me too. Whether it just be in this language fluency type detail, but more, psychically, you can tell that experience just gets passed on.
Now that you have children of your own, especially considering your line of work and your expertise, mm-hmm. do you feel like you're metabolizing or assimilating this in a way that might protect your children from generational trauma?
Oh, interesting enough, I'm in a funny place where I'm not afraid of the intergenerational trauma. In fact, I don't want my kids not to know a little of it. I don't want the full-on thing, as a parent. But in another sense, it gives a sense of priority to certain experiences. Also, it allows me as a person to empathize across other groups. I know people of my generation who don't have this kind of experience, and they can't empathize across other groups. And I don't know if that's just an individual thing or how they're taking things in or how much they've actually thought about it and all those sorts of questions. But now that you ask, I would actually be kind of horrified if my kids didn't know anything like that. I don't want them to be scared and hurt, but that's a very important element of empathy, sympathy, understanding. These larger issues of politics and racism, nationalism, if they didn't come with a kind of scar to it, I don't know, I would feel like I didn't do my job as a parent. But it is kind of, it's interesting to phrase it, for me to say it, because if my kids came out with no kind of sense of that, I think I would have failed. But then it's like funny to say that like you would fail by not passing on pain to people. But I think that's a very important rooting reality, and if they didn't have that a little bit, I think they've lost a lot of lessons.
You mentioned when you first started hearing about these things in your book, you talk about it, I think, being around a dinner table. I'd love for you to kind of explain that situation, bring us there, but also what was that like for you? You mentioned that you had kind of enough removal and curiosity to go into it, that they were okay talking with you. They didn't think they were going to traumatize you. But you're also now talking about empathy. And how you have been able to get this kind of intersectional empathy because of that experience and their experience. So what was that like as a teenager, hearing these things? Were you mostly curious, or did you have a lot of empathy? And also, can you kind of describe that experience for the viewers?
Yeah, going back to my late teens, early 20s self, I was definitely raised by my mother, who was one of the San Francisco State activists for Asian American Studies. And I was raised quite early about the kind of political consciousness from the time I was young. So the knowledge of internment camps and the ideas of what happened, and I had thoroughly, not thoroughly is the wrong word, but I as a teenager, done quite a good amount of thinking and digging and learning. My mother was not shy about sharing any of that, so I could talk to her about those things, my father as well. And so a lot of that knowledge, I already had a lot of that knowledge, so it's not like I would come to them like a blank slate, learning hit by it. I'd known things about like the military service, for example. I knew about the dislocation, displacement. I knew vaguely at that time, at my earliest time of these conversations, about my grandparents meeting in the camps. So I had a good amount of information going into it. So I wasn't asking primary questions in that way. In fact, it was almost like I didn't even have to ask questions at all. They just kind of turn on the switch, and all my my grandparents and their siblings just went at it and just started talking. And they just wouldn't stop. It was like I just, turn on the hose, and they just decide to discuss everything. So take me back there. I don't, shocked is not the right one. It was good information to know. I'd never heard those things, and my parents didn't know those things either. And I figured actually that they had probably heard those stories, but turns out they hadn't heard none of them. A kind of an interesting set of experiences, having these kind of, like water hose, just a revealing of experiences and opinions.
So your mom was involved with the San Francisco demonstrations, and can you tell us a little more about her involvement and also the impact that had on you? You mentioned that you knew a lot about this kind of stuff as a teenager because of her expertise and passions. Do you think that was a reaction to what happened with her parents, and how did that affect you?
Well, I think of her. I'm trying to think of like my aunts and uncles and that kind of age. She was probably the most politically active of them. Yeah, I think if I just scan my parents' age people that they all knew, I think she was probably the most politically active of them. Her best friend's also politically active, so I think they were good peas in a pod kind of thing. How did that pass down to me? She would always answer questions. And she had this funny dinner ritual, which is, I don't even know, it's probably middle school. She had we need to talk about something. And she wouldn't have a topic, but just we have to say, we are sitting here and we have to have an open discussion about something. And it was a really interesting, because it was an almost daily event, It could be just about anything. And a lot of political questions came up all growing up. And yeah, it definitely affected how I talk about things, how I think through things and evaluate things. In the 80s, I think it was a little bit more comfortable having conversations and having an acknowledgement that their kids have this knowledge themselves. I think there was a little bit of support at that time. I would actually be a little afraid of my kids right now doing that same sort of thing. So that's kind of interesting to reflect on. Yeah, there was a little bit of protection socially for those experiences. Also, like I'm the generation that saw the '92 LA riots and things like that. So I've had a larger kind of political, racial experiences growing up.
You mentioned that your mom was very proud of her culture and was really trying to preserve the Japanese culture in her life and advocate for that. Mm-hmm. Did she also try to instill that in her children?
Yeah, so she ran the international night for the middle school for even after me and my brother graduated. So she initiated and helped make it happen. And it was essentially a very kind of straightforward multicultural night type thing where everyone brought their cultural foods and they had dance performances and stuff like that. But what it was in content is not that exciting, but actually what it was doing is getting people together. That was the main idea. It wasn't just the celebration of each other's cultures, but we actually visit each other's tables and talk to each other. And part of that for each of the groups was learning the stuff and being able to explain things to people. So those nights, even though in content not exactly the most groundbreaking culture, ended up being a very important seed for all this community. The local community there and around the middle school, because we would all learn our cultures and present our cultures, and so that was really nice. Yeah, so she definitely had that. Learning Japanese cultural type stuff. That was both my parents did that. My father's side's Christian and Protestant. Presbyterian. My father's side's Presbyterian, mother's side's Shin Buddhist, and we went to all sorts of different kind of religious events, cultural events. Yeah, so it's definitely a part of my growing up.
You mentioned also that your grandparents started an acting troupe, and I'd like to know as much as you know about what it was like coming out of the camps, having to start over again. Can you tell us about those experiences?
Yeah, so my father's side, those parents, they were the ones married in the camps. They were in their early 20s. Immediately they went to find jobs because they're in their 20s, and they found canning work in Chicago. And while they're in Chicago, my grandmother learned a trade to do hair. So they took that to their next lives. They ended up back in Central California, but that's kind of that legacy there. My mother's side, they were school age. My grandmother, quote unquote, graduated from high school during the camps, and so she came out immediately. Actually, she moved to San Francisco. Interesting enough, back then they have these funny photos back then of it was like a super wealthy, high-class city at the time, in the 40s and early 50s, right? White gloves all over the place in San Francisco at the time, and she learned a craft there too. She was a tailor seamstress. So the kind of legacy of that is she did. My grandmother did the curtains for the local Buddhist church. Did all it's a big deal to do all the layers of curtains and the window curtains as well.
Wow. Do you think she had any difficulty reintegrating back into a culture that had been so demonized? To go then and make curtains for the Buddhist church.
Yeah, I think all my grandparents ended up in specifically Japanese American communities. My grandmother's business, hair, was actually in kind of not downtown, but kind of off downtown, Stockton, California. And she had a vast racial group of clientele. So one of the funny things about that legacy is that every holiday we would have tamales. And that's because my grandmother had Mexican clientele, and she had long-term, decades-long people, and they taught her how to do the masa and how to do the tamales. So we don't do that anymore because no one has that training. But all of my Esaki holidays had tamales, for example.
Are there any other cultures or traditions that you know of that have been lost?
Oh, lost, yeah. Well, the language thing's a big deal, right? I do know that they all had their regional dialects. They still maintained that even after all the American experiences and growing up. And that was one of the things that they would always, of their friends, be able to tease each other about, their accents and their, that kind of thing. So I lost all that. I bet if I met someone with that accent, I would probably be able to identify it, but I don't know where they're from and that kind of thing. That's just again a micro thing, but for me it's pretty significant. Mm-hmm. When I took Japanese language classes in Hawaii, everyone had Japanese family, and they all had songs and dialects and stories, all sorts of things from that region. And it's just like, here I am learning Tokyo business Japanese. I don't want to go to Tokyo and be a business person, Anyway, it's a micro thing, but for me, it feels significant.
Mm-hmm. What kinds of things are you teaching your children to retain that culture?
Well, they are kind of young. I'm trying to get them to use hashi, just kind of basic physical skills. I'm failing very much at teaching them kind of like patience, hierarchy, order. But I mean, they're little kids, so maybe it'll take time. What else? Little tiny language things. One of the funny things is my oldest class before he starts eating. It's like, I didn't train him, but he knows I do it, and he started doing it. So it's going to build as they get older. Currently they're 6 and 8. I try to introduce things. They hear Japanese stuff happen all the time in the house, so they can hear it, but they're not speaking it or anything. So, but that'll be as they get older.
You mentioned that one of your grandparents actually graduated from high school in the camps, and previously you had mentioned that the camps were run by the BLM.
Oh yes.
Similarly to the Indian schools, which tried to whitewash the kids and get rid of all of their culture. Do you know if anything similar happened with your grandmother, and can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so that side, they were actually, the end of the last year of their internment experience was at Tule Lake. And that's because my grandfather or great-grandfather was a no-no in the questionnaire. And that was because he's the oldest child, the only inheritor of the family stuff, and if they send him off to war, then might come back not alive. And as a result of that, their whole family and extended family were sent to Tule Lake. I didn't realize that it was I thought it would be just the one person, honestly, looking at the history books, but practically speaking, they just basically said, hey, you're going to go there. Do you all want to go? And essentially, the whole extended family went from this, from my knowledge, just the one child's responses from the one random survey they all had to do,
And can you tell us what the no-no represents?
Yeah, it's the questionnaire for loyalty. It's basically they asked all the young people, specifically young men of military age, to do a questionnaire. Now that I'm a scholar, I know what it was for. It was actually had like 3 sociological purposes. 1, just to get data. And then 2, to find links. If they found traitors, they would find all their networks. So a lot of their questionnaires was like, what like networks are you part of? And they would try to list those down. But really, ultimately, the government is not very, what's the word? They were lazy. And so they only cared about 2 answers. And one was, do you forswear allegiance to Japan? In other words, so imagine like a teenager, reading this thing, like, do you give up your allegiance to Japan? A lot of them were like, no, because I never had an allegiance to Japan. And so they wrote no, or they would write in the thing like, no, I never had an allegiance to Japan. And the other one, I think was, are you willing to, I think it was willing to serve. I think it was the other. Oh, anyway, and a lot of them would say no, and then in the written part, right? No, but if you give me my citizenship back, yeah. Or no, but my parents are stuck here, I'm not going to abandon them. Send them home, and I'll gladly serve in the military. They would have these caveats, but again, the government was fairly lazy, so they didn't look at any of the caveats and just looked at the notes. So yeah. That's what he responded no to, and as a result, the whole family elected to go en masse to Tule Lake. So the experience there was pretty rough. This is again the last year or so of their internment experience. The most memorable one of that is actually the youngest great aunt, and so she was kind of kindergarten age. So you can imagine a 6-year-old, like going through all this. Basically, she was like, you imagine a 6-year-old, like, what is happening? What's going on here? Apparently it was kind of nuts. They had people, the assumption, which is kind of right, was that all the people, like, why are they gathering all these people in this particular camp? And, what are they doing here? And the answer was, we're all the bad people. That's why all the prisons was much worse than the place they were before. We're all the bad people. And they're going to send us all back to Japan. We're prisoners of war, we're going back to Japan. So let's all prep for it. You're a kid, you're gonna be entering Japanese elementary school. So you better shape up your Japanese and learn how it is to be a Japanese elementary school kid. So yeah, so she, as a 6-year-old, all of a sudden could not speak English ever again, and just like went cold turkey, all Japanese all the time, because they were just like hammering in, you're moving to Japan. Like, you kiss this country goodbye. They don't like us. We're the bad people. We're going to Japan. Learn Japanese right now. And then whiplash a year later in like regular, public school, elementary school, being way behind in her English because they had just hammered in Japanese. And then again, this giant whiplash. So that's an example there of like the kind of effects of that particular age. My grandmother, since she had graduated high school, like, quote unquote graduated high school, was now no longer going to enter that kind of public school system. And that's why she found a trade to get employed now.
So not just the stories of your grandparents, but their siblings as well.
Not in depth, but from what I got to talk to them over the years too.
Can you tell us any other stories that you've heard from the extended family?
Yeah, one of them was a part of that initial one that I wrote up in the book, which is that they had 2 uncles there that were served in the 442nd, and they just had war stories to talk about. So one of them was say they climbed this infamous hill, and the medic has a white cross on their helmet, because in theory the white cross tells you this is a medic, so call upon them for help, and also as the enemy, this is not the armed militant that you're worried about. This is the person that's gonna. But actually, everyone didn't want to wear the white helmet because it was a easy sniper shot. And that's again an example of just a story from that. So they tell the experience of being in this foreign place, gunfire everywhere, knowing that you have to wear the white helmet, but no one wants to wear the white helmet. So that's an example of extended family story of that. From that, you get the sense that we have all these stories of patriotism, and obviously they, of any people who deserve their citizenship after World War II, I think it's them. But just on their mind wasn't necessarily the larger political purpose of why they were there, or their family's condition in the camps. They were just getting through day to day. And that came very clear from their stories, that they were focused on what they had a task, and they had to survive, and they had to accomplish the task of the day. So, having that kind of experience contrasted with my great aunt with her elementary school experience. So she's not serving in war, but that's a whole different, subset of things. My grandfather, in his early 20s, starting trying to get money to earn money for college, and then having that all ripped up. So he, till his dying day, was extremely angry because he felt his college was ripped from him. Now, I didn't know if he would ever get into college, or would he have enough money to save, do that? Would he be successful? I mean, he believed he was going to be an engineer, and he's kept that as his self-rhetoric, that I'm going to be an engineer, and I was going to be an engineer, and I was saving up money to be an engineer. So you have a real variety of different experiences through those camps. I mean, everything from outright confusion to just, my grandfather just became more angry as the years went. We had the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, creating the reparations. That made him madder. Instead of being satisfied, he now reads the government documents saying we apologize for this, and then instead of him going oh good, they apologized, he was just made him more furious. So it's a pretty big variety of looking across my grandparents' generation, experiences, reactions. It gave me a sense that there were, it wasn't just this monolithic thing that happened. And as I get older, every kind of life stage, I'll have a seasonal reflection on what would it be like to be now ripped out of my life and put in these prisons. Right now, I have these two kids, 6 and 8, and all I think about is what I tell my kids, what I do with my kids. One of the random heart-wrenching things that families had to deal with, that I would have to deal with, is that pets weren't allowed. So it's how do you tell my 6-year-old that her cat is not coming with her? And they would have family dogs, obviously, that wouldn't be able to make it. How do you explain that to your 6-year-old? Without hurting them. The government's taking us away. I don't know where we're going, how long we're going to be there. You're not going to see your friends anymore. Our cat's gone. That sort of thing. That's my current kind of thought process. What would I tell my kids? How would I keep my family together? What's my options there? My wife is of Polish descent. She's white. And for those with white wives, they had the option of not going. So women could opt not to go. And so I had the difficult question to ask my wife, would you go with us or not? Because I honestly be maybe you shouldn't go. No one knew what was going to happen or how long it was going to be, but I can easily see people saying no, you have a chance not to go, you are not coming. And she said, hell no, I'm coming. I would be, that kind of thing, because my kids are there, you're there, so every kind of age I think about that, and my grandparents were different ages at the time of the camps, and they all had very different experiences. I hope that filled in some of that question for you, the different types of stories I heard.
That's a really unique perspective. And speaking of unique perspectives, you have grandparents that not only were in different camps, but then and also great uncles and aunts, but also some that transferred from one camp to a much worse camp. Can you tell us about some of those differences between these compounds and what life was like there?
Well, I know academically what happened in Tule Lake, but personally, I didn't hear much except for the kind of just. I get the sense that Tule Lake when it was isolated. Back up. After this, the government had to deal with what do we do with this document where all these young men, had sworn that they would not first swear the allegiance to Japan. Now, again, there's a lot of caveats involved, but now all of a sudden, a lot of the kind of pro-American representatives of Japanese Americans at the time told the U.S. government, just go in the camps, ask young men to serve in the war. We are American citizens. We're going to sign up in the thousands. We're just going to all show up because we want to prove we're Americans. We're ready. We're willing. And so the government walked into this assuming that was was going to happen, and they created this questionnaire, not thinking anything about what they're doing or why they're, anyway. Only, I believe, 3,000 or 5,000. Anyway, it's in the low thousands of men fully just volunteered for the war, out of the tens of thousands that were of military serving age. And that was a big shocker. And so the government's now with this large set of young men who are not going to serve in the military, who have now declared that they won't. Again, this is the U.S. government's mentality. Not going to forswear their allegiance to Japan. And what do you do with them? And so they decided we're going to just, instead of trying to isolate them in individual camps, we're going to send them all to this one camp, vacate that people from that camp to go somewhere else, send them all to this one. And yeah, they had this decision that they would allow families to go en masse with the young men who answer that way, or they could just send the young men alone. That was an option too. And yeah, everything I heard, which is not a lot, was that it sounded just insane. That all the paranoia they had to start out with was just cranked up. They all believe this is what they said. I don't know how factually true it is, but they just said that everyone believed they're going back to Japan. Everyone believed they're now officially prisoners of war. That was one of the early suspicions among all the camps, was that why are they gathering us up? They're obviously going to use this as American prisoner exchange. They thought that was the most likely scenario. The government didn't tell them anything, and they also really didn't have much of a plan for what to do all these Japanese Americans. But that was a consensus thought, is that we're stuck here because whenever American prisoners are going to be taken by the nation of Japan, they're going to want to exchange something for them, and they're going to want their citizens back. That's the thought. And so once they gathered all the people that were the troublemakers, quote unquote troublemakers, they just collectively said, like, yeah, we're going back. They had a whole subset going like, now we're going to be pro-Japan and teach everyone about how great Japan is. We're going to enter this like hyper-nationalist nation, and you better be ready for all the rhetoric and how to say the right things about pro-Japan. So they like taught all this to the kids and the young adults, and it sounded just like a madhouse. In addition to being uprooted from their temporary prison life to a new, higher security prison life, it just sounded like it was just brutal. Yeah, they already couldn't eat much, and like the rations were worse, and it was bad.
And you compare that to a wedding where the guard is the photographer,
right.
And
yeah.
Wow. Where did the arts take place? You mentioned that they were making things and creating projects and things in the camp.
Oh yeah, right. So you're asking an important question a second ago. You said a lot of them, the administrators, are from the Bureau of Land Management. So their original goal before internment camps was running reservations. And one of the things that they believed is that they failed their planning of reservations. So a lot of reservations, they just basically said, what is it to be an American? And they had this vision of like rural pastoral life. And they said that's what Native Americans should do. Go into farming, raise cows. And so they gave people cows. Excuse me. They gave people cows and like, here's some farming techniques and stuff like that. And to imagine Native Americans being uprooted from their homeland, obviously all the leaders being demoralized that they couldn't protect their people. They were not anxious to like be cow herders, and that kind of thing. But anyway, the thing that they took, these government officials took from that is we did the wrong thing. We tried to make them into pastoral things instead of focusing on democracy. And so that's what they focused on for Japanese Americans. They said, we need to make Japanese Americans into very democratic people with voting, capitalists. We need to make them understand what American capitalism is and what it's like to hold a 9-to-5 job, because they didn't know how to do that. It was just kind of insane thoughts when you think about it. A lot of like patriotic type things, American flag waving, patriotic songs. They liked the idea of doing certain arts that matched the Americana image, so marching bands. They provided Western instruments, so guitars and things like that. So there were like country bands and stuff there too. They had jazz bands, and the jazz bands that they would fund. We're not like radical jazz bands, but more like kind of the Glenn Miller, popular culture, pro-war jazz bands. But interesting enough, there's all sorts of kind of subspaces in there for other stuff. They didn't have any Japanese language translators, so they very much feared anything done in Japanese because they thought that would be how they would organize and overthrow the government. Again, all this sounds nuts, but so they're worried about all sorts of things in Japanese. A lot of arts, however, were not well, they are in Japanese, but you can do them without Japanese. So painting, calligraphy, poetry, all sorts of arts, physical arts, origami, and any things like that you can potentially teach without the Japanese language terminology done, were able to be done. Like sumo wrestling, they had sumo clubs and stuff. Again, you didn't have to use all the Japanese stuff, involved. Obviously, clearly there's tons of Japanese culture in it, but they had like sumo competitions and things like that. They did limited kabuki theater, but there's a scholar, Roxworthy, and she did the research on this. But they were allowed to do the kabuki because they front-loaded it with American patriotic plays. So the first half was all like whatever, I don't even know what American patriotic plays are, but they did them first, and then the second half was the Japanese kabuki stuff. So they were able to do Japanese arts, but they are all kind of like done in ways that the guards wouldn't freak out about. You could do calligraphy, but not Japanese poetry in that way. You can do poetry, but not in Japanese. So they could teach Japanese poetry styles, but obviously in English, which is, doing Japanese poetry in English is a very big challenge, but they would be able to do stuff like that. Woodworkers could teach wood crafts, carving wood crafts, nails, all sorts of things like that. Gardens, they were able to do Japanese gardens. Again, because they could potentially do them without doing things in Japanese. So there were a lot of Japanese arts done in the camps. They had to be changed, altered to fit that policing situation, but they still were able to do them.
You mentioned some artworks that you've inherited. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about those, and if there's any kind of syncretic idea of blending cultures or what was available?
So there's one that's, one example is one I have that's very precious little, well, they're both precious because they're from the camps. One is called shogi. It's like a Japanese chess kind of thing, roughly. And my grandfather hand carved and lacquered a shogi set. The board didn't last, so I don't know where the board ended up, but I could potentially buy a shogi board or make one to match it. But that was one example there. And you can see that it's basic carving. It's not that complicated. You know all the rules to making all the pieces in the right sizes and stuff is not a big deal. Carving a board and making that also totally manageable. And it could be good because you can spend your nights playing with other people of your age and that kind of stuff. The other one is a fun example that I have at my house. This is from my grandmother. This is my mother's mother. And she was again in high school during the camps. And one thing they did was gathered local cactus, dried them, and lacquered them. And they had all these funny like cactus projects because that's the stuff that was around right in their immediate vicinity. But yeah, I still have this art piece. The reason it's important to me is not just because it was from the camps, but my grandmother actually had it on her mantle the whole time growing up. I had no idea it had this legacy and history. She put these little like Japanese fish in it to like kind of a pretty display thing. And so that's all I knew of it. It was just kind of sitting there all the time. But eventually I asked about it. It's like, oh yeah, I made this in the can. Do you want that? You like us? Like it was just, and yeah, so it's a cool little family heirloom. Yeah, it's just this random thing she did as a high school student. She described it as being like, you have art class, you got to do something. They didn't have money to get art supplies, and this is what we could gather and do. I don't know how long it took to do a lacquered cactus. I'm guessing a multi-week project because the gathering, the shaving, the drying, then the lacquering. I believe I did hear from others that they did other people did other projects with them, like painting them and kind of using them for plaster and stuff like that. So,
thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to add?
No, I think I just to reiterate, one of the things about this family history that I have is that at every kind of age, I'll rethink of where I am, and I think back to my great-grandparents and my great-great-grandparents who I never got to meet, and thinking about what they all went through. I think that's one of the things I just want to reiterate, that it wasn't just a single age of person, it was everyone, taken from their context and put all together. And everyone brought whatever their knowledge they had, whatever kind of empathy they had, and tried to make a community. I didn't mention this, and I don't want to end it a sour note, but my grandmother never ate carrots for the rest of her life. And that's because she only affiliates the bad grade F carrots in cans that they would get as their rations, you know? All that to mean is there were chefs working hard to take these horrible rations and make them into meals for the community. But they were like legit restaurant chefs that were there and just thrown in the camps because they were people who are experts and cultural experts, community experts, and they're all together and they just try to make something happen.
And then finally, if you could give one piece of advice or a word of wisdom to others regarding this experience, what would it be?
Oh God, don't do it again. Just don't do it again. Oh my goodness. I've heard way too many people cite this as a positive option. What do we do given X, Y, and Z? Why don't we do what we did to the Japanese Americans? You know, like, why don't we just, it worked, right? Look, they're fine. You know, like, or, you know, it was easy. We didn't see, you know, like, we got rid of the problem, or it's just like, that's a piece of stuff that just shows up. It's just like every 5 years I'll hear someone use it as a positive example. And it's always just mind-blowing to me. So don't do it again. If there's something that seems like it, don't do it again. It was a massive waste of government money. It was traumatic. It didn't do anything. It didn't make Japanese Americans feel more patriotic. Like, it failed at every possible measure of success, and also caused massive disruption. So if there's a piece of nugget of advice, don't ever do it again. If it sounds like it's similar, just scrap it. Do something. Come up with a different answer. Come up with a different solution. Learn from my own community. Just don't do it.
In what context do you hear people say that this is a good idea?
legal ideas, political ideas, incarceration ideas, cultural ideas, terrorism, like whatever kind of issue of the day that you can't find an easy solution to, it just gets continually brought up. And I don't know if it's just flat ignorance, or they never talked to a Japanese American, or it's just a thing in the books that's an option. Mass incarceration is always an option, I guess. Yeah. So, and in the legal precedent as well, gets cited too. So, it's just, yeah.
Thank you so much again. This concludes the interview.